morning, everyone. So this is a partially recycled message, but it's been a very long time ago, and a lot of people here weren't here at that time to hear it. And it's been so long, I doubt anybody remembers it. But it's a bit of an unusual type of message, so you might remember that I did give it. But as in prelude, I don't have a joke or anything, but it actually ties into what I'm going to be talking about. I'm talking about metaphors and language and stuff, kind of, a little bit part of what it is. And so one of my favorite ones that I've heard kind of recently from other countries is, we had used the phrase kill two birds with one stone in a meeting, and we have some guys from Serbia, and of course you can tell what that means. You don't have to know. I mean, I don't know how often you go killing birds with stones. Although that does remind me of when I was a kid, about 12, boy, I'm rambling now, but I had a game where I would throw a rock trying to hit a bird, and then it just occurred to me, which I thankfully never could, but then it occurred to me, man, what happens if I hit one? I want to kill a bird. It's like, why am I doing this? So even at 11 or 12 or whatever I was, I had enough sense to quit doing that. Of course, I didn't have enough sense not to start, but, kids are kids. But anyway, back to the two birds. The phrase in Serbia is, and other European countries too, I understand, is kill two flies with one swat. And I kind of like that one better because that seems like something you might actually accomplish and want to do. But my point about kind of tying in, that type of a metaphor or idiom, I guess it's more of an idiom, even though it might not be yours and you would never come up with your own, it makes sense. You can kind of get the idea of what it means. And a lot of those that are in the Bible are like that, where they're not ours, but they kind of make sense and you can know what they're talking about. But so the topic is the original title, and it's a little bit different now, but is things I learned about language reading in Spanish and English. And so when I was a kid, 15 and 16, I lived in Puerto Rico for a couple of years. Unfortunately, I did not learn Spanish nearly as well as, in hindsight, I wish I had have. For one thing, we went to the Army school, although my dad wasn't in the Army. But so all instruction and all the kids could speak English. Now, 70% of them could speak Spanish too, but they spoke English to me for the most part. It was at church I got my real grilling in Spanish. Those services were in Spanish, and those people didn't speak English, most of them. And so my church vocabulary is really good, especially since I went to church both on Sunday with my mom, and those people really didn't speak English. And then in the worldwide church with my dad on Saturdays. And that minister was American to start off with, so his Spanish was a lot easier to understand. Whereas the native Spanish speaker of the other guy took about a year and a half for I finally could follow him. But anyway, a bunch of years ago, as an adult, I realized I couldn't understand Spanish at all, hardly. It's like, oh, man. And so I started reading it in Spanish, and like I get the English and then the Spanish, and it's helped my reading a whole lot. Unfortunately, not my hearing it very much, but I did learn some things reading in this. Like this Bible here has Spanish on one side, English on the other, and it's a New King James, and on the left-hand side is the Reina. How do you say that? RVR, which is Reina Valera revised. And I looked up, and that's similar to the New International Version, like kind of the equivalent of English. So it gives you the two primary feels for what this biblical text is. One thing that is kind of useful about reading it in Spanish versus English is Spanish is a little bit closer to Greek than English is. Of course, Spanish derived from Latin, and even though Latin didn't really derive from Greek, they both derive from the same parent, and so they have similar traits, such as I'm drawing a blank on the word, but the conjugation. That's it. Similar conjugation, and also similar that nouns have gender. So one thing that is similar is in Spanish has a plural you, something English doesn't have, but common with Greek, and it has a singular you, just as Greek does. Now, official English doesn't. Now, I've adopted saying y'all. I feel like, I kind of avoided that because it's not in the dictionary, but it's like, you know what? That's too useful a word. I'm going to use it. So, other than saying y'all, English doesn't have a plural you. So that'll be my submission to Webster. We need to add that one as official word. But anyway, if I said, how are you? You have to have context to know, am I talking to you or am I talking to the group? Which usually context is good enough. But when you read it in Spanish or Greek, which I can't do obviously, you can tell, is it talking to one or the other? Now, it usually doesn't matter, but there is one passage that actually makes a not salvation type difference. I was going to say significant difference. Well, it makes a little bit of difference. So this is in Mark 14, verse 37 and 38. And this is when Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And y'all probably remember the story, but I'll just read 2 verses out of it. It's verse 37. And then he, of course, that's talking about Christ, came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch an hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Now, if you notice, the word you is in that little phrase a few different times. So the you in 37 is singular. If you look it up in a Greek interlinear, it'll tell you that's the singular version of you in Greek. In Spanish, it is singular. And through research, I found, well, I don't know research, but looking it up, I found that when it's singular in Spanish, it's singular in Greek, and vice versa. When they stay faithful to that. If it's plural in Spanish, it's plural in Greek. But the verse in 38, I always thought that was singular as well. Pray and watch, lest you enter in temptation. But it's not. It's plural. So he's not speaking specifically to Peter in verse 38. He's saying it more generically. I'm not sure who the you plural is in that sentence, but I think it's just generic world. Hey, watch out. Pray unless you future readers, or you whoever hears this message is going to enter into temptation. Of course, he didn't necessarily, Jesus, but I don't know if he knew this particular sentence was going to be in writing. But I think it's when you say just a you, meaning people in general. Like, when you got a headache, you say something like that. You mean like people in general. I think that's what it means. But anyway, he wasn't picking Peter out specifically, and you can tell that in Spanish. You can't tell it in English. Except there is an English version that everybody knows about that you can do that. And this is the one place where the King James actually has a little bit of advantage over all the other translations that aren't King James. Let's see. And so I'm going to read it out of King James. And it goes, And he cometh and findeth sleeping, and said to Peter, Simon, sleepest thou? Couldn't thou not watch 1 hour. And so thou is singular, you. And then, but the next verse is watch ye and pray. And ye is a plural you. So, I thought that was a good little thing. So if you really care about it, you can always look at King James for that. So I did look. So this is Greek, right? So I wonder if that goes with Hebrew. So, in the Ten Commandments it says, thou shalt not, and thou shalt this, and that kind of stuff, right? I looked it up, and it doesn't really tell you if it's plural or not. The Hebrew, it doesn't apply to the Hebrew in that sense. Well, actually, my note here says it is singular Hebrew, but I don't think, I don't know about that. Anyway, I don't know. My memory is contrasting with my notes here. Should have gone over them better. But anyway, one thing about the King James, a lot of people think that's it, King James, everything else is heresy. Well, people that don't speak English, come on, what are you going to do? You're not going to read the King James. The best you could do is take a translation of the King James, and then you're not reading the King James. So, well, anyway, don't get started on the King James. Although it is a very important, it's great. It helped bring Christianity to the world, right? The Word of God to the world. So, very important. But anyway, I think my page is almost out of whack here. So another thing that from Spanish is the nouns have gender. And so, like if you say damela, which is give it to me, the la is the feminine thee. Well, it could mean give her to me. So if you're holding a baby girl and I say damela, is hand her to me. If you're kicking a ball and you say damela, you say kick it to me is what you're saying. So Greek's the same way on that. And but beyond that, because of the way they conjugate things, they mostly leave, well, not mostly, I don't know about mostly, but often leave out the pronoun altogether in Greek and in Spanish, and you can't do that in English. It just is not proper English. And so in John 14, I believe, I hope it's John 14, but anyway, I've got verse 16 here. Let's see, John 14. Mateo, I'm going to turn to John 14, and I'm hoping this is the right chapter. Yeah, so John 14, verse 16. And I will pray the Father, and he will give you another helper, that he may abide with you forever. So, he may abide is one word in both Spanish and Greek, and it has the pronoun mixed in with the verb. Now, the pronoun can be he, or it could be she, or it could be it. You cannot tell the difference in Spanish or Greek. English, of course, you don't just say may abide. You have to, it just is wrong English. You have to say he or the full pronoun or the full noun. But anyway, he may abide with you forever. And the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him. Now, this is an actual article, the him, and that is a masculine article in Greek and Spanish. The interlinear Greek translates that to it. But it could be him or it. You just don't know. But it can't be she because it's a masculine article. Or knows him, but you know him. For he dwells, and again, he dwells is one single word, with the pronoun being implied, with you and will be in you. So I must mean 26. So anyway, those are things you can tell in the Spanish, and it matches up to Greek. So I've got Hebrews 10:15 is another example. But the Holy Spirit also witnesses to us, for after he had said before. So in Greek, there's not a separate word for he, and that's just implied. So there's a couple, okay, so off the grammar for a bit. There's a little bit of differences in translation so I'm struggling along in the Spanish and cross-reference to the English because I don't know Spanish that well. It's a learning exercise. And then I read something that does have no match over in English at all, and then I have to stop and go look it up. And it turns out some of those where the Spanish is actually more accurate. Now, not very often. I don't think it is in general more or less accurate. But Matthew 18:6 is one example. And this is where Jesus says, "But whoever causes one of these little ones to believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of a sea." And but the Spanish is different than that. It says millstone of an ass, which a donkey, right? And so now I looked it up in the Greek, and the Greek interlinear says a millstone turned by an ass is its definition. And so to the hearer in Jesus' time, I imagine that would have made a significant difference. You know, it has to be a big millstone if you need an animal or burden to turn it. It's not like a home version, which, do they have a home version? I don't know. But I don't think, I forgot to look this up this time around. So I can't remember, but I don't think very many of the English translations have that. They just say millstone. I was telling my preacher cousin about it. He goes, they use oxen. It couldn't have been that. It's like, well, all right, I didn't argue with him. But the Greek does say millstone of an ass. I mean, so I don't know. I think he's mistaken on that. So another place I thought was interesting, and this just falls in the category of interesting, not necessarily any more accurate, but in John 1:1, the thing is, if you're talking to somebody that's learning English and they're only from a Spanish background, they may be surprised at how we translate it. But it's a very famous verse. I mean, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, it's logos, right? Logos. But Spanish translates it this way. In the beginning was the Verb, and the Verb was with God, and the Verb was God. And that sounds odd to an English ear, I think. But if you think about it, verb is a type of word. I don't think the Greek specifies that it has to be an action word like that. I just think it's their tradition. But those really steeped in the Spanish tradition that is how they're going to view it, is that God is a verb. I thought, well, maybe it goes back to, Exodus 3, where it says, God says to Moses, I am who I am. And thus you'll say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. I thought, well, I am by itself can be just a verb in Spanish. However, most of the Spanish I saw does put the word yo, which is the word I. So yo soy, el que soy. So that was I am that am. But the soy, the second soy, is implied I. So it's the same as I am that I am. Anyway, I don't know. That's not neither here nor there, I guess. So one other difference, and this one turned out to be, if I was reading a different English translation, it wouldn't have been different. But in Jeremiah 9, 25, and 26. And this one goes back to, this is a contextual phrase that meant something to Jeremiah, assuming he wrote Jeremiah, that doesn't really mean anything to us. But it goes, "Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will punish all those who are uncircumcised with the uncircumcised." And then he lists these people: Egypt, Judah, Edom, the people of Ammon, Moab, who are all in the farthest corners. And that's the phrase that's different. Who are in the farthest corners, who dwell in the wilderness. Well, those are who are in the farthest corners, and I'll just say it in English, is literally they shave their temples in Spanish. And the NASB, I'm pretty sure, and a lot of the other translations do say something about that. And I do have what okay, so NASB says this: all those who inhabiting the desert, who trim the hair on their temples. And then the NIV says all who live in the wilderness in distant places, but then it has a footnote, or wilderness, and who clip hair by their foreheads. So the Spanish, I don't think, in Spanish it didn't say the wilderness. It just says the about they shave their temples, and I believe the Greek is the same way, about cutting away the edges. I'm assuming that this group of people was well known for perhaps having odd, maybe they didn't do that back then. You just had the full beard and they just shaved that part. I don't know. But the that is that one, and I'm reading here. So one other kind of a side point about Spanish. Most of y'all probably knew, but the Romance languages have a formal you and an informal you. So you say to your children, or to any child, or good friends, you say tu and usted. Well, I thought, well, maybe the Spanish and Greek is similar on that. It isn't. The Greek does not have that, so you can't look at Spanish and get any context from that, because that is actually not a concept for Greek. I did notice some Spanish translations use the informal all over the place, where others use the formal all over the place. So I guess they just pick on that. Now, I didn't go through. The ones that use formal may occasionally use the informal. I don't know. I didn't go to that level of it. And I have one other thing about metaphors, or idioms, figures of speech. And this isn't Spanish or anything. This is just plain old idioms. So in Matthew 9:15, Jesus said to them, "Can the friends of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and they will fast." So he was asking this to give context. The Jewish authorities there, or people, were kind of digging at Christ's disciples. Hey, your guys don't fast. We do. We're more righteous. What's wrong? What's up? And Jesus was explaining, hey, this is part of why he's not doing it. Now, the phrase friends of the bridegroom is a figure of speech in Greek. And the New King James does have a note that says this means literally sons of the bride chamber. And I looked up MrGreekGeek.com, and it says that that phrase means friends of the bridegroom participating in wedding festivities, the wedding guests or friends of the bridegroom. So I guess maybe the closest word in English we have is groomsman, but it may not be just groomsmen. It might be anybody that sits on the groom side, perhaps. I'm not sure. So the Greek word, even with these definitions, there's probably a little sub-meaning about it. Could mean his really best friends, or it could mean all of his associates. I'm not sure. At the time, it probably meant something to him. Um, but anyway, so the NIV says guests of the bridegroom. NABS, New American Standard, says attendants of the groom. So those translations, guest, attendant, friend, I think gives a true meaning of what Christ was meaning there, but maybe not the ultra subtle context of what the original was said, which, by the way, the original's in Aramaic, most likely, translated to Greek, so who knows what that, real subtle. Thing is, we can get the point without that, so that's good. I mean, we get the actual real point of what Christ is getting at. However, translations that put the word children in there, I think, so that's literally, the word children is in the Greek. Or it means children or sons of the bride chamber. The problem with putting children in there is that it could give a false impression, especially if you're thinking these were children of the groom before he got married, which would perhaps imply that, you could go off and say, well, these are illegitimate children perhaps. And one of the translations that does that is the King James, and it says, can the children of the bride chamber mourn? Of course, in the rest of the context, you would say, well, that doesn't make sense. They're going to mourn for the groom while they're at the wedding. I mean, so friends of the groom obviously fits the context. And this is one of those places where, now the Revised Standard says wedding guest, which is close, but it doesn't tell you that it's the guest of the groom. Whereas the Greek word specifically means guest of the groom. I guess we don't have that in English. We don't have a single word for all that. And obviously neither does Spanish. What it says in Spanish is yet another idiom that doesn't even mean that. In Spanish it says, los que están de bodas, which literally means those who are at the wedding. But it means the guests, the invited people. It does not include the servers or guards or anybody else that just happens to be there. So that's another example where an idiom, another idiom for Greeks. Anyway, I just thought that was a little weird. So, anyway, where's my conclusion written? So, I don't really think Spanish is more or less accurate. I think it's important to look at different translations, and to me, the interlinear. I did learn something this time around. I don't know if it was available when I did this semester the first time, but there's an interlinear Hebrew at the same place that its interlinear Greek is, and it works more or less the same way, which was, to me, good. Now, the Hebrew's harder to read because its characters are more funky than the Greek, which are still a little bit hard to read. But, to me, an important point is don't get hung up over one phrase or word, especially if it contradicts what you know about the Bible. Now, I also say don't just dismiss it either. I mean, everything's important, but, put it in context, study it, and you may even have to put an asterisk in your mind by it, because you're like, but don't just automatically do either because translation is difficult. You have idioms that do not translate exactly across languages. And on top of it, a lot of these were spoken, so it's translated once when it was written. So, anyway, I think, though, the most important thing is what you do understand and what's obvious. If everybody just did what the Bible is super clear about and everybody agrees, I mean, what a wonderful world we live in. So if you live by what you know God's saying and those things you're a little bit iffy on, okay? But if you're not living by what you know he says, who cares about the iffy stuff, right? You got to do what he says. And I believe, let's say you misunderstand something and even have a practice that's not what God intended. I believe he'll respect you still if you do what you think the Bible is saying and just live your best by the word.